Welcome back to Subculture Film Reviews, and now I want to take a look at a brand new movie that is coming out on VOD this week. It is a comedy horror. Now, as you all know in the past, sometimes I'm a little bit harsh on horror comedies because they tend to go towards the comedy rather than the horror element, and of course I'm a really big horror fan. The film I'm talking about is called Witness Infection. And I have to say, this is one of those movies that actually manages to find a great mix between comedy and horror. It's directed by Andy Palmer, and it tells the story of Carlo, played by Robert Belushi, who is the son of a mobster. Now, Carlo doesn't really want to live in the mobster lifestyle, and he's kind of been removed from it a little bit because two mob families, were removed from New York and accidentally placed in the same kind of country, rural town. And they still try to go about their lives living like they're mobsters, but the locals are having none of it. So there's a story mentioned in this film about one of the sons trying to shake down this old lady who runs a store, and she doesn't get that she's being shaken down, and she instead goes out and buys business insurance. So it's not going too well for these mobster families, but they're still at each other's throat. And after the death of one of the mobsters, suddenly it is put onto Carlo that he is going to have to marry Patricia, played by Erin Hayes, who is from the rival family. Now, the two dads going toe-to-toe, Mr. Sorelli, played by Carlos Alzraqui, I think you would say that, and Mr. Mioli, played by Maurice Lamarchi. Now, they put in some great performances, and this is one of the things I love about this film, is that even though there's a comedy element to it, there is a very serious element to this film as well. We mentioned the character of Carlo, played by Robert Belushi. Well, he's actually working as a dog groomer, and he's in love with his colleague Gina, played by Jill Michelle Mealing. So he's not very happy when he finds out that he has to marry Patricia. Now, there is some great scenes revolving around these families, and this whole conversation about why Carlo has to go off and marry Patricia. Just to add even more into that, Patricia is actually in love with Carlo's brother. So there's a whole element in there, and it works really brilliantly well. Now, where does the horror come into it, I hear you ask? Well, the horror comes into it because contaminated meat is turning people into zombies. Now, at the start of this film, we don't know what is causing the contamination. When it is revealed later in the movie, it is absolutely priceless. I take my hat off to the writers of this film, because they have done an absolutely brilliant job. The thing that I really like about this movie, though, is how it pays homage to movies that have come before it. There's a character in this film who is called Vince, played by Vince DeVito, and he dreams about being a screenwriter. So a lot of the times he makes references to movies that they're kind of paying homage to, or they're parodying in different parts. And I think, to me, that's where the comedy of this film works, because even though they do kind of parody things that have happened in other movies, it's never completely over the top, and it's kind of believable. In fact, the one movie that I think I can probably liken this film to is The Scout's Guide to the Zombie Apocalypse. If you remember that movie, it was over the top, and it kind of parried and made homage to B and C grade horror movies from the past, but it never kind of overstepped the point where it was okay, this is getting too ridiculous. This film does the same thing, and quite often, and this sounds really weird to say, the comedy actually enhances the suspense of this film. There's a brilliant scene here where Carlo actually has to go and kind of make penance to Mr. Miola, because he has said straight out that he's not going to marry his daughter, and then all of a sudden he realizes what this means for his family if he doesn't, so he goes to apologize. Now, that scene, when he goes to apologize, is kind of made even more funny, because Miola is starting to have the effects of the actual contaminated meat. His two bodyguards have been farting like anything for the last 10 minutes of the film, and it's that's where you realize that this film is something special, because yeah, okay, it's got a couple of fart gags in there, but it doesn't go into that whole ridiculous kind of comedy where that becomes a big thing, or it's trying to get a cheap laugh out of it. Really, the burps and the farts are there to show the audience that these guys are getting sick. And then when Mjolnir's feeling the same effects, it actually enhances the scene, because you keep on thinking, what the hell is going to happen if he turns into a full-on zombie while Carlo is there? Also, the whole relationship thing between Carlo and Gina, it is handled so well. Like, one of my favorite horror comedies is actually the Scary Movie franchise, especially the early films. But I've realized, like, even watching this film, the Scary Movie kind of love stories that are in there are completely ridiculous and stupid. Whereas the story here between Carlo and Gina, it works so well that you actually care for them as a couple, and you want to see them get together, even though you've got Patricia there in the middle. There's one scene in this film where I'm not 100% sure that it needs to be there. They just suddenly introduce this character who works in a bar called Rose, played by Monique Coleman, and she delivers this huge, great big speech about how she's not going to be the African-American character that just gets killed in this film. That would have worked really, really well if they'd introduced her a lot earlier and we'd got to know her character. It just feels a little bit weird in this film, considering that she suddenly comes out of nowhere kind of thing. If you remember back to Scary Movie, there's a gag in that about one of the characters, like, I think it's Shorty, screams out, "I'm getting out of here, like, white people are dying, I'm not going to be next." That worked because that character had been there previously, but with this character of Rose, she's not there any earlier on, which is kind of annoying, because she's a likable character, and you kind of wish that she had been there a lot earlier as well. But look, I'm just going to say, this is a horror comedy that works brilliantly well. The comedy is there. It doesn't overshadow the horror side to it. The horror element, the zombie element, it works. It's a homage to Romero. You can tell that. It's referenced a couple of times during the film, but you can also tell by the way it's shot and the way the story is set out. But look, you could easily say that the whole zombie thing has been overdone over the past few years, but this movie is so far removed from other zombie films that you don't care. Witness Infection works so well, being placed in this kind of mob lifestyle in the middle of a country town. It works, and it's different to anything else that we've seen out there on the market. So look, if you're in one of the regions where Witness Infection is being released this weekend, definitely check it out, because this is a brilliant little horror comedy. I'm going to give it 3 out of 5.